You spend 30, maybe 40 years building your super. Every pay cycle, a slice disappears before you ever see it. You watch the balance climb. And somewhere along the way, you make an assumption. You assume that when you die, this money goes wherever your will says it goes. It doesn't. Your super is one of the biggest assets you'll ever own. And for most Australians, it sits completely outside your will. Get one detail wrong at the end, and a large chunk of the money you spent a lifetime building doesn't go to your family. It goes to the tax office. Not because anyone did anything wrong, just because nobody explained how this actually works. So let's explain it. This is general information, not personal advice. But by the end, you'll understand exactly what happens to your super when you die. Who can receive it? Who gets taxed? And the small handful of decisions that quietly determine which way it goes. Here's the first thing almost nobody realizes. You don't legally own your super the way you own your bank account. It's held in trust by the trustee of your fund on your behalf. While you're alive, that distinction barely matters. When you die, it changes everything. When you die, your super becomes what's called a death benefit. And your will, on its own, has no automatic power over it. Think about that. You can have a perfectly drafted will, updated last week, and it can say nothing about where your super ends up. So who decides? By default, the trustee of your fund does. They look at the rules of the fund and the law, and they choose who receives your money. Unless, and this is the key word, unless you have given them a valid, binding instruction in advance. Most people haven't. They filled in a form when they joined the fund a decade ago, ticked a box, and never looked at it again. And a lot of those instructions have quietly expired. We'll come back to how to fix that. First, you need to understand who is even allowed to receive your super, because that's where the real trap is. There are two different laws at work here, and they define one word, dependent, in two different ways. The gap between those two definitions is where families get caught. The first definition decides who can legally receive your super at all. Under superannuation law, that's your spouse, including a de facto partner, a child of any age, someone in what's called an interdependency relationship, someone who is financially dependent on you or your estate. Notice that. A child of any age can receive your super. Now the second definition. This one decides who gets it tax-free. Under tax law, a death benefits dependent is your spouse, a child under 18, someone in an interdependency relationship, or someone financially dependent on you at the time of death. Read those two lists again, side by side, and look for the difference. A child of any age can receive your super, but only a child under 18 receives it tax-free. That means your independent adult children, the very people most Australians assume they're leaving their super to, can receive the money, but they are not tax dependents. And because they're not tax dependents, the taxable part of your super gets taxed on the way to them. It doesn't matter that they're your kids. It doesn't matter how close you were. The law is not measuring the relationship. It's measuring a definition. So how much tax? To answer that, you need to know that your super is made up of two components, a tax-free component and a taxable component. The taxable component itself can have two parts, a taxed element and an untaxed element. Hold that thought on the untaxed element because it's a nasty surprise on its own. The tax-free component is exactly what it sounds like. It passes to anyone, tax-free, always. The taxable component is where your adult children get hit. On the taxed element, they pay 15% plus the 2% Medicare levy. So 17% if the fund pays them directly. Let's put real numbers on it. Say you die with $500,000 in super. $100,000 of that is the tax-free component and $400,000 is taxable. Paid directly to an adult child, the tax on that is $68,000. $68,000. Gone. out of money that was already taxed once on the way in. Now, there's a quirk. If that same benefit is paid through your estate instead of directly, the Medicare levy drops off. So the tax falls to $60,000. Routing it through the estate saves $8,000. But it also drags your super into your estate, where it can be contested by anyone challenging your will. So it's a trade-off, not a free win. And now, the untaxed element. The surprise. If you hold life insurance inside your super, the payout from that insurance is treated as an untaxed element. No contributions tax was ever paid on it, so to a non-dependent, it's taxed higher. 30% plus Medicare, so 32%. Take a $600,000 benefit that includes a big insurance payout, and the tax to an adult child can jump past $120,000. People take out insurance inside super to protect their family and never realize it can be one of the most heavily taxed parts of the whole thing. Here's the good news. Almost all of this is controllable, and the levers aren't complicated once you know they exist. Lever 1, your nomination. There are a few kinds. A non-binding nomination is just a preference. The trustee can ignore it. A binding nomination legally forces the trustee's hand. But in most funds, it lapses after 3 years, which is exactly why so many people have an expired one sitting in a drawer. And a reversionary pension, if you're already drawing a pension, lets your income stream flow automatically to your spouse when you die. So step 1 for everyone watching is simply this. Know which kind you have and whether it's still valid. Lever 2, the transfer balance cap. This is the limit on how much you can hold in the tax-free pension phase. Currently, $2.1 million. It matters at death because if your spouse inherits your pension on top of their own, the combined amount can push them over the cap and the excess has to come out. A reversionary pension helps here too. It gives the survivor a 12-month grace period before the inherited pension counts toward their cap. Breathing room to restructure at the worst possible time to be making financial decisions. Lever 3, and this is the big one for the adult children problem. The recontribution strategy. Remember, it's the taxable component that gets taxed. So while you're alive, you can withdraw money from super and put it straight back in as a non-concessional contribution, an after-tax contribution, which lands in the tax-free component. You're converting taxable money into tax-free money. Go back to our example. $400,000 taxable, $68,000 in tax to an adult child. Shift the bulk of that into the tax-free component over time, and that tax bill can drop to under $7,000. That is not a rounding error. That is the difference a bit of planning makes. Now, the honest caveats, because this is general information and not advice. Recontribution generally only works while you're under 75. It's limited by the contribution caps. And it interacts with the work test if you're between 67 and 74. This is exactly the kind of thing to map out with a licensed financial advisor, not to improvise. Before anyone panics, let's keep this in proportion. Super is still one of the most tax-effective places to hold money in this country. This death tax only bites at the very end, and only when the money goes to a non-dependent. Don't let the tax tail wag the dog and pull money out of a great structure for no reason. And if your super is going to your spouse, which for a lot of couples is the whole plan, none of the tax we just talked about applies. It passes tax-free. The adult children issue is real, but it's specific. Know whether it's actually your situation before you act on it. So here's what to actually do this week. It costs nothing. 1. Log into your super fund and find your death benefit nomination. Check whether it's binding and whether it's still in date. If it lapsed or you're not sure, that's your first job. 2. Ask your fund for the split between your tax-free and taxable components. You can't plan around a number you've never seen. 3. If you hold life insurance inside your super, understand that it can create that heavily taxed, untaxed element for adult children, and factor that in. And 4. If most of your super is likely to end up with independent adult kids, that's the trigger to sit down with a licensed financial advisor or an estate planning lawyer well before it's urgent, and look at recontribution and how your benefit is structured. You spent a working life building this. Decades of small sacrifices you barely noticed. It would be a strange ending to hand a chunk of it to the tax office by accident over a form you never updated. This isn't morbid, it's admin. And it might be the cheapest, highest value bit of financial housekeeping you ever do. An afternoon of logging in, reading, and asking a couple of questions. This has been general information only, not personal financial advice, so please check your own situation with a licensed professional. But now you know what happens to your super when you die. And more importantly, you know it's yours to decide. If this cleared up something the forms never explained, do me a favor. Hit like and subscribe. It's a small thing, but it genuinely helps the channel reach other Australians who assume their super just follows their will. More boring, useful money videos are on the way. I'll see you in the next one.